Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second talk of the day. And in the session, we will have Robert Hoffmann, who is a senior solutions architect, and Christian, who is a senior customer solutions manager, both at Amazon Web Services. And they'll talk about forget developer platforms, think developer productivity. So, gentlemen, if you are ready, I'll leave the stage to you.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. So I'm Robert. I'm a senior solutions architect, and I have Christian with me today as well. And yeah, as the title implies, we want to talk about platform engineering. But what we really want to do is thinking about, hey, what is a better way to actually build developer platforms? How can we be more customer-centric? And when we say customer-centric, we really mean developer-centric, right? Because developers are your customers for that developer platform, and you want to give them the best experience, and especially you want to give them what they need. Now, during this talk, we will see that the definition of what is actually developer productivity, what is developer experience, which is closely connected, we will see that there's really a broad scope of things you need to think about when thinking about the developer. And that scope will also lead us to discuss Gen AI tools, and that will be the part of Christian to show you how can we actually make development much easier with cool Gen AI companions. And we will go way beyond the coding things you typically see, and we will really see how Gen AI companions can help throughout the whole life cycle of the developer. So let's jump right in. So the gist of the talk is basically saying, well, let's do not lose yourself in like traditional platform engineering, where you build a platform, but you really operate a lot of software on your own in your platform teams, which takes up a lot of time. And instead, you would focus more on integrating ready-made services that are already available, so you have the headspace to actually think about developer productivity. And in the rest of the talk, we will dive deeper into what is developer productivity actually, how could you actually measure it, what are good proxy metrics for that. But before we dive fully into it, let's take a step back. So how did we get here in the first place? So there's this guy, Werner Vogels, and that's the CTO of Amazon. And in 2006, so quite some time ago, there was like an interesting interview with him where he talked about how teams at Amazon actually build and operate products. And essentially what he said is, well, he thinks a good way to build it is to also run it. And that catchphrase, you've probably heard it before, right? You build it, you run it. So the idea is really that developers should be in contact with the day-to-day operations of their software. And he thinks this is really like critical feedback that you need to improve your service. And also somewhere around this time, maybe 1 or 2 years later, the whole idea of also DevOps started. So kind of adding to that, the idea of DevOps is to, hey, how can we move developers and development and operations closer together to also have tighter feedback loops and improve our services? So that's all great, right? But fast forward to today, there's just this little issue here, this post stamp you see on the right, and that is complexity. So just as an example, I have the CNCF landscape here, but I do not really want to throw CNCF under the bus. That's a talk for another day. But essentially what you can see here is there's a lot of stuff to think about as a developer when you create a new service. You have a lot of cool capabilities to build service, to test them, to roll them out, to make them highly available with Kubernetes and a lot of other cool services. But it's still a lot of cognitive load for the developer to figure out all these tools and maybe even run some of them. And this is really where platform engineering comes into the picture of saying, okay, we want to make this easier for developers. We want to open up that ecosystem for them and basically remove that extraneous cognitive load and help them to be more self-sufficient with these cool tools. So, okay, then great. Let's build a developer platform. And I'm just showing here like a high-level picture of our developer platform could look like. This is again from a CNCF platforms white paper. There are a lot of pictures that look more or less the same. So you see that you need a bunch of capabilities for developers to actually run applications. So you see like infrastructure like compute and networking. They need to store data in like object stores and databases. They need some messaging. And they need a lot of supporting services. So we see identity management, we see service binding, artifact storage, observability tools, all these kinds of things. And then on top of that, you also want to make it easier for developers to actually use that stuff, to find that stuff. And that's where you have the platform interfaces. And there you see things like just plain old documentation, templates, maybe even UIs like Backstage, or special APIs and CLIs that really help to use the bottom layer of these capabilities. That's all great, but what we sometimes see with customers is that you can lose yourself in building the perfect platform here. So essentially, you have your textbooks platform of how you want to build it, and you start building a lot of services, you start running a lot of services, and you kind of lose sight on focusing on what your developers actually need. So some of the, let's say, signals we sometimes see that show you that it goes into the wrong directions is what I would call the downward spiral of platform engineering. And essentially, you can see it from the very far already, and it's typically being in a state where your platform team runs too much things and also runs the wrong things. And wrong things meaning here that these are things that your developers don't really need. Adoption is not super high. People like to use different services for that if you leave them an option. So you kind of lost your way a little bit. And if we zoom into that in detail, it all starts with, kind of prioritizing the wrong work streams and features for your platform. And from there, you kind of start reinventing the wheel by building undifferentiated services. So you build the typical stuff because you do not really know better. And this typically happens because you're not close enough to your user, to your customer, which is the developer. So some typical issues we see is that platform teams or engineering teams not talking enough to developers to figure out what's actually the biggest friction point, what problems are developers really facing, and what's the best way to solve it, maybe even in a very scrappy way, right? Without boiling the ocean. Now you go further into the spiral, and the next thing that's happening, right? You build all these undifferentiated services and you're running them. So now you're spending most of your resources on that. And sometimes we hear a lot of frustrations from platform engineering leaders who are saying, well, people are asking me for new features and so on, but I don't have time. I just need to keep the lights on with the stuff I already have, and feels so frustrating because I want to help people, but I'm kind of caught up in already running the things that I have already. And then from there, it's also something that we see from time to time is that these teams that are running these services, they are really clinging to that service. They feel like this service is their reason of being, and that this is their identity essentially. So, and often you can spot it very easily by saying, "Oh, what's the team called running the Kubernetes cluster?" Well, it's the Kubernetes team, right? You basically put their identity in their name, right? It's not like the compute team or something, which is a little bit more broader, but it's the Kubernetes team. So now when you have a discussion on like, okay, shall we still run Kubernetes in-house? Should we move to a different container service? Well, the Kubernetes team thinks, well, but my name is Kubernetes, so what am I going to do then? So this is also a problem where like we hear from leaders that they're really thinking about broadening the ideas of the team, broadening the scope to be less reliant on just one service. And let's say side problem that sometimes arises as well is like believing to be good at building abstractions. So building abstractions over services, over infrastructure, it's really hard. It's what cloud is trying to do. It's what SaaS is trying to do, and even they get it wrong some of the time. So sometimes to add up to all of that, we see teams really being caught up in building the perfect abstractions, but it's really hard to do that. They are leaky. When something goes wrong, the developer, all the complexity behind the abstraction is like spit out and is falling on the feet of the developer, and they are really confused. So you can also lose a lot of time in building like the perfect abstraction. And finally, to lock yourself really into your misery here in the spiral is like you live in kind of an echo chamber, and you're only measuring what you already have. So you want user feedback, but you might not do it in a holistic way. So maybe you have Kubernetes, right? So you ask your developers, hey, do you like my Kubernetes? Yes, cool, okay. But you're not asking them more broader questions like, hey, what are actually your problems? What are you facing day to day? And these questions are difficult to deal with, but that's really where the value lies in, as we say, working backwards from your developer. So how did we end up with that downward spiral? Well, the problem is, as we stated in the beginning, that you weren't thinking enough, or we weren't thinking enough about developer productivity, and didn't work so much backwards from the developers. And that's a nice catchphrase, right? Everybody can say that, oh, you just need to think about developer productivity, but how do you actually do that in practice is the million-dollar question here. And thankfully, there's some recent research, recent content from a lot of thought leaders that really help us to figure out, okay, how should we think about developer productivity? And one great framework I want to introduce you to today is the DevX framework. And that is really a framework to basically improving developer productivity through developer experience. And you probably know the authors, because it's a very well-known bunch. These are the same thought leaders that also brought you other frameworks like Dora and Space. And in the latest thoughts here, they basically model developer experience in those 3 core dimensions that you see here. So feedback loops, cognitive load, and flow state. And they're basically saying that a developer needs all 3 of these to be really productive. And together they make up developer experience. And developer experience is a great proxy for developer productivity. You might have seen there's a lot of discussion on like how to actually measure developer productivity, but it's very hard to do. And it looks like a better way to do it is to actually think about developer experience and use that as a reference point for productivity. So you can probably imagine what the things are about. So feedback loops is about, hey, if I make a change, how fast can I get feedback for that? Then you have the cognitive load. That's one I think that's a little bit better understood, and that's that's a point that's talked about a lot when we think about platform engineering. So how much stuff do I need to keep in my mind to complete a task? And then finally, there's flow state. So the ability to really go into the zone, go into tunnel vision on focusing on your task, not being basically being somehow pulled out of it through meetings or other things. So typical questions here are, okay, how much time do you have uninterrupted to work on your tasks and so on? And what I really like about this framework is that it's very user-centric, and it's a specific user, right? We're not modeling someone who wants to buy a television. We're modeling the developer and what is important to them. And so the developer is really put in the center here. And that works very well also in an Amazon context, because we have this working backwards methodology where we think about, okay, how can we create a product that works for the customer? And with such a customer-centric approach, as Jeff Bezos, our founder, also famously said, The great thing about having this customer-centric approach is that customers are always very dissatisfied, even if they, on the surface, they report everything is great. So really talking to your developers, figuring out what is bothering them, what they want to rant about, is a great way to build a developer platform that actually works for them. Now, going a little bit more into this idea of the working backwards process, which is something you could also do to improve your platform or create the initial version of your developer platform. You can see here how we typically do it. So there are 5 customer questions. Hey, who's the customer? In that case, it's the developer. What insights do we have about them? What's the prevailing problem? What's the solution and the benefit for them? How can we describe it to them? How can we describe the experience? And how can we actually measure that hypothesis that we have? And how can we measure that success? And as part of that process, we built a bunch of artifacts that you can see here. So there's a fictional press release that basically announces the product. And of course, you can also use that internally. It doesn't have to be something you sell externally. You basically imagine how would you basically introduce the new capabilities of your platform internally, maybe in your internal social network. Typically, we also draw some visuals. They can be super scrappy, but they just help to get the idea across. And then there's like extended documentation, like an FAQ that goes more into detail, what is actually built there, what is it not, which is also very important. And that is like the general process we use to put ourselves in the mind of the customer and work backwards from them to figure out what is a great product for them. Now, this is a very generic process. So how can we enrich it with DevX? Well, we can use that DevX framework to really zone in on the developer persona here. So again, as you remember, we have those 3 dimensions of feedback loop, cognitive load, and flow state. And now we can basically figure out more about the developer's problems through like 3 dimensions, 3 layers. One is the perception layer, where you really ask the developer what their perception is of how easy it is to do certain things. So, for example, here you ask, hey, what kind of friction do you have in your feedback loops? How fast is it to actually validate a local change? For cognitive load, you're asking, hey, how easy is it for you to debug a production system? And for flow state, you're really asking, hey, what is your feeling? How many hours per week are you actually in flow and can work uninterruptedly? Now, the questions you're using might vary, so this is not like a comprehensive list. And the idea here really is you figure out what are the right questions for your company, but the important thing is to really touch upon all those 3 dimensions. And then you enrich that with a workflow layer. And the workflow layer, that's more of a quantitative measure. So the first one is really qualitative because you ask people. And then in the workflow layer, you really ask quantitative questions. You try to get measurements out of your system, maybe your CI/CD system, and you put those qualitative and quantitative measures together to figure out what can be improved and what are the main problems your developers are facing. Finally, to round it up, you also add KPIs. And these are really like North Star metrics because you always want to figure out the changes I do in total, in the sum. Are they actually improving things or are they making things worse? And this is where the KPIs are helping you. So you ask for things like, hey, how do you feel about your overall productivity? And ideally, doing something like a survey or an interview, which is a good way to gather this data. You would want to see that this goes up maybe every half of a year or something. Now, when you look at that, some people might raise their eyebrows because we're talking a lot about qualitative data here. So asking people, asking about their opinions and so on. And there are a lot of misconceptions about that. So can we actually trust data we get from humans? I don't have time today to dive really into that, but I have a really great article recommendation for you here. It's on the Martin Fowler blog. It's co-written by one of our colleagues from Amazon, Tim Cochran, who is part of our software builder experience team that tries to make the builder experience better at Amazon. And they have written a great article that's basically about making the point that to measure developer productivity, you should really prioritize or at least start with gathering data from humans rather than gathering data from systems. And they make a lot of great points why this actually works. They remove a lot of misconceptions, and there's actually a lot of good how to get started guidance in that article. There's even a survey template in there that you could send to your developers or use for interview questions to figure out what their problems are. So if you're going out of this talk and saying, well, that makes all sense, but I need, some more hands-on guidance, directed guidance on how to get started, this is a great article to read. So definitely recommend that one. So to sum it up, we said in the beginning, we want you to think about developer productivity first. We just saw you can basically take that term and replace it with developer experience. So developer experience is a great proxy for productivity. We showed you how you can use that DevX framework to set your mindset for how to think about the developer and what their needs are. And this can actually give a lot of cool benefits. So one of them is you can using DevX as a guidance, right? You can change the core identity of some of your platform teams, maybe move the Kubernetes team to a more broader scope and focus more on the experience than on a particular service or technology. And when you do that and work backwards from the developers with that framework, you also see that the scope of your work actually increases a lot, in the sense of there's many ways to improve the productivity of a developer. It's not just about running a particular service. It could be as simple as, there's just some wiki page missing for some initial guidance. Maybe developers just need a new laptop because the current one is slow. Or they just need help getting started. And GenAI companions are actually the right guide here for them to get started. And what cool things we can do with GenAI companions today to really cover the whole life cycle of developers. That's what Christian is going to talk about next. I think you're on mute, Chris.
Thank you. Okay, then let me go back one slide. So thanks for joining, and this is the second part, and we'll be talking about how you can unlock the next productivity frontier with GenAI. Let me jump right into it with a study by McKinsey & Company. And this study shows the global economic impact of GenAI. And the key takeaway here really is 75% of the estimated global annual GenAI impact really stems from just 4 functions. And this is marketing and sales, this is product and R&D, customer operations, and software engineering. And software engineering really stands out to me in this case, because if you add those bubbles up, you will end up at roughly 900 billion global annual GenAI impact, just by productivity boosts. Before we go how we can achieve that, let's talk about how we can actually measure developer productivity. And for this, I would briefly cover the most popular 3 frameworks. I'm starting with DORA. I think this is really the most widely adopted and most popular one, talking about deployment frequency, change lead time, change failure rate, and time to restore a service. A more recent framework is called SPACE. And SPACE is recognizing more that development is a socio-technological process and adds more dimensions to DORA to really capture that. So they are capturing satisfaction and well-being, communication and collaboration, and also efficiency and flow. The last framework, and Robert walked you through that already, is developer experience, or in short, DevX. It's about increasing the flow state, reducing the cognitive load, and shortening feedback loops. And while GenAI will change a lot on what we are going to measure in the future and how we are going to measure it, and activity and output-based metrics will get even less useful than they are right now, I think the mental model behind developer experience will still hold true. If you increase the flow time and reduce cognitive load and shorten feedback loops, you will end up increasing productivity. And the key takeaways on that slide basically are, there's not a single dimensional metric to capture to actually measure productivity. You will need quantitative data, think about DORA, instrumentation, and telemetry, but you also need qualitative data, surveys, like Robert pointed out. Talk to your customers and do surveys. And the last one, also Robert touched upon that, developer experience, or DevX, is likely the best proxy to actually measure developer productivity. So how can we increase developer experience? And there's a study by Harvard Business Review about employees in general, not only developers, that employees are more engaged, significantly more engaged, and are more likely to stay beyond 3 years in the company if they have the right technology supporting their work. The right technology can mean a lot, right? It can be tools, it can be platforms, but what really is transformational right now is generative AI. There's basically not a single talk or summit without it right now, and for a good reason. This McKinsey study really shows that developers using GenAI feel more happy, can focus more on meaningful work, which is more satisfying, and they are longer and more often in the flow state. And I think this is great proof on how you can improve the flow state and reduce cognitive load by just staying more focused on meaningful work. But to go beyond studies and to real use cases, let me start with one I guess every one of you is quite familiar with: coding companions. So they're translating natural language to multiple code suggestions. They can match your developer style. They hopefully know your internal code base. They can do security scanning and open source reference tracking. So they will hint you, okay, where's the code from, which license is used, which saves you a lot of work in the post-processing because it like compiles a list, helping you to know which licenses are applying. So my observation is, however, that the adoption rate is quite low. Talking to large German enterprises, I found that less than 20%, I would say less than 20%, are really using coding companions at scale. And that means there is a lot of opportunity left, because just by adopting coding companions, you're a lot more likely to complete a task successfully, and you're on average 57% faster. There are a lot of studies out there showing that, but talking about DevX, we know that's just some hard metrics. There must be more, and there is. Developers using coding companions are feeling more productive. They spend less time searching, which helps them to stay longer in the flow. And overall, this leads to higher job satisfaction. So this is actually what we need. And so coding companions are great, right? But the typical developer is just spending 4 hours and 21 minutes coding per week. That's 52 minutes per day. And even if you check like the top 90% in that study, still they're coding less than 2 hours and 10 minutes per day. And while at first this seems a little bit odd, it absolutely makes sense, right? Development is much more than coding. And given the landscape Robert was laying out, there's a lot of like designing and deciding to do before you actually start development. But there's even more. And this Gartner study, really shows that the typical developer is spending 73% of his time on running and maintaining applications, and less than a third on actually doing innovation and transformation. And again, this might sound strange, but let me walk you through a brief example because it actually makes sense. Let's say you build your app with your favorite coding companion. When you're done, the actual work really starts again, right? Let's say you run your app on a shared Kubernetes cluster, and then you do encounter an error. So first thing you have to do is you really need to understand the issues. Dive into metrics, understand all the logs. Maybe you need to interface with your platform team to understand what's going to happen, or if what happened on their side. Maybe you even need to dive into Kubernetes logs yourself, right? The abstraction broke, and now you need to learn Kubernetes and understand the issues. When you understood the issue, you need to design a solution and decide for it. Then you actually do the coding, right? Then you have all the review, pull requests and review. Maybe you need to update your monitoring, your observability, and then you deploy the fix in production. Maybe that even happens a few times too often, and then you said, okay, no, let's move off that shared Kubernetes cluster. Let's go fully serverless to get a little bit more time back from like running and maintaining. And that's a great approach, but maybe it's not enough, right? You might choose a better platform, but the question really is, what do you need to do to switch, to really flip that equation, right? To give the developers time back on innovation and transformation and creativity instead of running and maintaining applications. And while there are many answers, we believe one crucial answer is having a development companion who really supports you across the whole software development lifecycle, from understanding, designing, developing, reviewing, monitoring and testing to maintaining. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to break it down bit by bit, starting with understanding and learning. Let's say you're new to the company, new to a team, you have new responsibilities, or maybe you just want to add a piece of functionality to a code base. First thing you always have to do is to understand and learn what are the functional requirements, non-functional ones, what is the existing environment, and then you go to design and decide for a solution. And there's an interesting concept in the realm of DevX. It's called knowledge discovery efficiency, or in short, KDE. And the KDE is a mathematical construct which can have a value between 0 and 100 and is calculated for each developer individually. And it basically signifies the knowledge that developer is lacking or not lacking to complete a certain task. So basically, when the KDE value is 0, a lot of information is missing. A lot of learning is required. Let's say new frameworks, tools, languages. This means there's high cognitive load and it will take long until the developer can complete the task. If the KDE is close to 100, this signifies a solution where there basically is no knowledge gap. Everything is known. Like, judging from my personal experience, this rarely is the case, right? You may have, like, if you know Star Trek, and you know that Q guy, this omniscient, almighty being, he likely has a KDE value of 100. We don't. So the question is, can Gen AI maybe help us to build an all-knowing Q who can, like, instead of us researching all the time, who can simply explain stuff to us? This would increase our KDE, shorten feedback loops, and increase the time we can stay in the flow. And also will reduce cognitive load. So the answer to the question basically is yes, we can do that. You can build a development companion who knows your environment and can help you to understand an existing app, requirements and use cases. And like, how does it know? You ask the question, you get the answer. It knows because it has access to all your internal documentation, whether it's like Atlassian tool sets, whether it's Git. Wherever you document, you can add the resources so the development companion knows all about your internal documentation, and you don't have to search for it yourself all the time. Instead, you can do it in a conversational way. So as the development companion knows not only your use cases, but also your code, he can help you with creating a user story, right? A technical user story, we can do that. And the development companion can even create a Jira task for you. So, and this really increases my knowledge discovery efficiency, but it also helps me to like just shorten feedback loop and be faster in the stuff I'm doing. So next step is I want to decide for a solution and design it. I have an idea, but I don't know if the services I want to use are allow listed. In the past, right, we used to tend to shoot an email to the Cloud Center of Excellence and ask them, right, feedback loops. The faster way is actually just ask your development companion. It knows, right? It has documentation. access to it, and there I go. 2 of the services I want to use are allowed, 1 is not. Why does it know? Again, internal documentation. And it can even help me to understand, okay, what do I need to do to get that service allow listed because I really want to use it? And there I go, I get the answer. Shortening feedback loops. The next step in the development lifecycle is to actually develop and then to review. Also for develop, first thing you need to do is to understand your code base. And again, your development companion can help you with that. You can simply ask me, okay, tell me what the code is doing. Give me a description. And it will break the existing code base down for you, telling you, okay, there's a unique ID, why is it used, like, what is it good for? And you can even ask it for, like, give me improvements for that. Or you can ask it for more test cases to increase the test coverage. It can even help you to insert it in the actual code base. Maybe you even want to go beyond that. You have your code base and you want to add to that existing code base, you want to add a new piece of functionality. To support you in the process, you can simply ask the development companion, hey, please add the add product functionality. Instead of going through understanding and learning, deciding yourself, you can start at an elevated precision based on what your development companion actually tells you. You get a step-by-step plan, what he wants to change, and how he wants to change it. Yeah, he will also add test cases. Okay, great. You get a summary. And there's a smart action button, write code. This takes a little bit longer than what you will see here. And there you get the solution. And instead of like doing everything yourself, you can just check what changes did the development companion do and whether you like it. And if you don't like it, you can iterate over it, either via like just asking questions. Why did you do that? Can you like this? Can you change it? Can you improve it in that way? Or if you're happy with it, you can simply accept it. And what you can also see not at the top, sorry, at the bottom, there are the test cases for the product. Okay, that's great. So the development companion really helped us to develop a piece of functionality based on existing code. The next step in the software development lifecycle is to monitor and test. Depending on whom you ask, it's not the most favorite part of the software development lifecycle. And frequently when you try something the first time, it doesn't really work out, and then troubleshooting begins. What you can do is you have Flask app based on Lambda functions, and you try it, it doesn't work. You get a lengthy error message, and what you actually want is a brief overview of what's actually going on. And here you get that, right? The coding companion tells you there is a put item operation, and yeah, it seems like you don't have the right role to do that. And you can ask him, okay, help me generate a solution. I want to fix that. So first step was really lengthy error message summarized in 2.5 lines of short descriptive error message. And then you even get a resolution, right? Okay, this is the explanation of what you need to be doing step by step. And if you want to be fast and scrappy, let's go CLI command. Takes a few seconds to generate it. And at the very bottom, you always have the option to provide feedback. And feedback is really important to continue the development of the development companion itself and continuously improve it. So here you get the CLI command on how to fix your issue. This is, again, reducing your cognitive load, right? You don't need to digest all the lengthy logs. You don't need to Stack Overflow the issue and try to figure things out. You get an analysis, you get a solution very fast without switching tabs. The last step of the development process is actually maintaining the code. And how would you do that? How can the development companion help you? In that case, the development companion will take your code, put it in a secure environment, transform it based on static rules, and using also LLMs for the non-static rules covered code base, and transform it either from an old language to a new one. Think about COBOL to Java, or think about Java 8 to Java 20. And this can speed you up significantly and actually get you back on track to focus not on maintaining apps, but actually on building innovations. Okay, one last slide. To sum it up, basically what we've heard is developer experience is likely the best proxy metric for developer productivity. And while platforms can really help you to increase developer experience, you need to make sure that you're working backwards from your customers and developers. Think about quantitative, but also qualitative data. Talk to the people to make sure you reduce feedback loops, you reduce the cognitive load, and increase the flow time. And while coding companions are great and not widely adopted yet in most large enterprises, what you actually need is a development companion who is really supporting you throughout the whole software development lifecycle, going from understanding to develop, testing, upgrading. And actually what you want is you want to have an all-knowing mentor who's always available to answer your questions. When it comes to platforms, there are a lot of great platforms, but you need to be careful. They might be providing illusions rather than valid abstraction. And when something breaks, your developer still needs to dive deep in Kubernetes logs, which you actually wanted to prevent. So our call to action basically is spend less time trying to build the perfect abstraction. Instead, have a development companion who's actually explaining things to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert and Christian. It was very interesting talk. Personally, I knew Dora metrics, but space framework, I didn't know. So I just learned it. It was very interesting. And we have a few minutes for the questions. I'm just checking. We don't have any questions, but I want to a little bit wait for audience to type their questions. And in the meantime, maybe I have a question. Like, what do you think? What might be the reason for the low code companion usage?
Christian,
Maybe
what
some security reasons or something else?
We've been talking to some industry leaders about that in the past time, and it's really a mix. There's still an uncertainty whether, whom is it helping best? Is it helping junior developers or senior developers best? Is it creating great code, or is it more introducing risk? So there's a lot of uncertainty still around that, and just a few questions. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and it feels like it takes a long time to really have it valid prototype and then roll it out. To think about large enterprises having 3,000 or more developers, this will take time to really get it done. But I think we're on the way.
Mm-hmm. I see. That makes sense. It might depend on the level of people. All right. So yeah, we don't have any questions yet. But if you have any last messages, please feel free to share, and then we can close the session.
Yeah, I could quickly add to what Christian said. I think another thing is also everybody is just playing a little bit of the waiting game, because I think a lot of people have the mindset, a lot of companies, I need to decide for one of those companions, right? I can only have one. It costs something, whatever. So the cool thing is a lot of stuff Christian showed. There's if you're using AWS, there's actually a free tier, so you can even use these functionalities without paying something or getting an additional subscription. It's basically included. And I think in the future we will see more ways to actually use multiple companions, right? Because you could think that there's different agents that have different strengths, right? One agent is good at creating SQL commands for me, one agent is good at using AWS, and so on. And I think as we go along this very interesting path, it will open up, and you actually will have a choice. Developers have a choice daily, basically, to use the right companion for the job. Basically, what Christian showed, right? There was different. It's all maybe called queue, but it's actually different companions that are trained on a very specific task, and that makes it easy. And I think this is where we're going. And as this ecosystem opens up, I think it will also be easier for companies because they feel like they need to commit less to one specific assistant.
Mm-hmm. All right, sounds interesting. Yeah, thanks a lot for this great session, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a great day.